If you know anything about Scott Pilgrim, you know it's about video game references. If you think those are fun, then you'll think this is fun. It was actually the first love story marketed towards gamers, a fact that I just made up because it fits the narrative of my video. It might even be true. The movie came out while I was still in college, and it's the first time I remember gaming culture being represented seriously in something mainstream. It has a special place in a lot of people's heart pieces, which is why Netflix is turning it into an anime now. Like from Japan and everything. But before the 2023 Netflix anime, before the 2010 movie, and before even the first comic was published in 2004, in the distant past of the 1990s, Scott Pilgrim was a song. The band Plumtree was formed in 1993 as a four-piece all-female Canadian indie rock power pop band, while they were still in high school. The first album proved popular with college radio stations, even snagging the #1 spot on the college national radio chart. The album had 3 singles: Go, You Just Don't Exist, and Scott Pilgrim. According to one of the band's members, Scott Pilgrim is a song about yearning, like, this is what I want so badly, but I don't know how to make it happen, and I'm waiting and hoping. Among their many loyal fans was a half-Korean, half-French-Canadian man named Brian Lee O'Malley. Brian was a college dropout, having left his film studies courses in order to work as a letterer and illustrator for an American independent comic book and graphic novel publisher called Oni Press. In 2003, 6 years after the release of the song Scott Pilgrim, Brian Lee O'Malley released his first original graphic novel. It was called Lost at Sea, and it involved a girl, a road trip, and a cat that steals souls. When he excitedly showed it to his friends, it made them uncomfortable. It was, in his own words, very emotional. So he decided that for his next book, he wanted to make something funny. He just wanted to make his friends laugh. By then, Brian Lee O'Malley was 24 years old and living in Toronto. He had just gotten through a brutal breakup and spent most of his free time playing shitty bass for local Toronto bands. He decided that, if the world ends, I want to leave a record of whatever I'm up to. In the typical way of breakups, Brian was feeling nostalgic for the music of his youth, especially his favorite band, Plumtree. He was particularly fond of the repeated phrase through one of their most popular songs, I've liked you for 1,000 years. And as Brian waited for inspiration for his new funny book, he finally began to wonder, who is this guy Scott Pilgrim anyway? He's a piece of shit. In more generous terms, Scott Pilgrim is having a moment. And this moment has been being had for the past year. He has no money, no job, no relationship, and aside from a band he plays shitty bass in, no ambition. You all know that guy. He's that guy. If you are also that guy, please try not to be. That guy is quite a burden to be friends with. When we are introduced to his character, this moment is manifesting itself as an unhealthy relationship with a not quite illegal in Canada high school girl. But don't worry, it's not that kind of story. See, Scott is aware that this relationship is, let's say, not a good look. So he decides to idolize the first girl who pops into his head, which happens to be a girl who can do that literally by accessing a subspace highway that passes through his dreams. No one is surprised by this. Canada is weird. But Scott, being the aforementioned shitpiece, decides to fall head over hell with this manic pixie from his dreams girl, initiating a new relationship without completely ending the previous one, the dick. But don't worry, it's also not that kind of story. He does manage to break up with the high school girl on his second or third try, but not without cheating on her first. Your heroic protagonist, everyone. This should all just be exhausting, but it's not. You see, Scott Pilgrim is adorable in that I'm going to adopt this puppy because it only has one eye, kind of adorable. He's lovable because his actions aren't dictated by malice, he's just an idiot. He doesn't mean to hurt anyone, he's just dealing with some shit in the only way he knows how, which is by not dealing with it. Again, don't be that guy, but if you are that guy, you better make sure you're drawn funny. Scott Pilgrim works as a hero because he does want to learn to be better. He just needs more of a push than some of us do. No shame in that. The fun part is seeing what happens when he finally gets going on that path of self-realization and redemption. This is the best character growth, the kind motivated by lesbians. As previously mentioned, Scott Pilgrim is about becoming a better person. Scott does this through 6 volumes of Don't Call It manga by facing the figurative demons of his girlfriend's literal past, aka her 7 evil exes. He does so in absurd, hilarious, dramatically drawn, video game and anime-inspired fashion. Honestly, that's kind of the whole plot. What else is there? Right, video game references. It's full of them, and other pop culture things too. When Brian Lee O'Malley began the comic, he was quite obviously inspired by anime and video games. Specifically, the manga Ranma 1/2, which was the only one he had ever read, and also the video game Street Fighter, which was, quote, basically my reason for existing in high school. The humor was largely based on Sam and Max comics, as well as the Monkey Island video games. But beyond the surface level Leonardo DiCaprio points at the TV memeness of the nerdy references, the story also sneaks in a complex weave of various themes for your literary pleasure. ChatGPT will gladly write you an essay about Scott and Knives' coming-of-age identity crisis, the way Ramona subverts gender expectations, or how the story depicts the rise and fall of all manner of relationships of both the romantic and friendly flavors. Please don't use them for school. That will not make you better at critical thinking. I personally like to view the series as an examination of liminal spaces, with the subspace highway acting as a visual metaphor of Scott's reality. Scott is trapped in a limbo state between childhood and adulthood. He's moved out from his parents' house, but only across the street. He shares an apartment, but doesn't contribute anything. He's finally moved on from his last breakup, but in the least healthy way possible. He's mature enough to know better, but not mature enough to correct the behavior. It's no stretch to view this as a millennial text, as I tend to do with things. These same liminal spaces exist within our real world. Most of the indicators for being a successful adult no longer apply to us. Adults are supposed to be married, have children, own their own house, have a stable job, and a healthy retirement account. We sort of don't do that anymore. And without being able to satisfy these indicators, we're stuck feeling like children in adult situations that we aren't prepared for. But unlike us, Scott's future isn't doomed. His relationship with Ramona and his resultant battle with her exes force him out of this perpetual limbo. Winning Ramona's heart is no passive task. If he wants her, he can't be a slacker anymore. He has to act. I mean, it's with his fists, but, baby steps, right direction, and all that. With any series that has multiple versions and adaptations, the inevitable question becomes, which one's the best? But Scott Pilgrim continues the theme of liminal limbo by not really having a best one. I haven't seen the Netflix adaptation yet, but based on the trailer, it's going to be pretty true to the source material, with a lot of extra story included. The original comics have aged well, with the exception of a few jokes, so reading it is still fun. And while the best lines come from the comics, the best presentation comes from the movie. To complicate this further, the original comic was redone in color at some point, and the movie's script was rewritten before it was filmed in order to be more like the fourth book that had just released. And now the film's actors are performing the voices for the upcoming Netflix anime. If you want my opinion, which presumably you do since you've watched this far, thanks by the way, I would actually start with the movie, if for no other reason than the fact that it's the shortest version of the story, and also it's directed by Edgar Wright, who might be the funniest man in Hollywood. From there, if you like it, you could choose either the Netflix anime or the original comic, depending on if you're more of a fan of sequential still art or animation. There's more to the story than just the movie script, and there are more characters to meet, with some bonus ways that Scott is a dick. Beyond the passive media, there are also the games. The video game is the one most people are familiar with. It's a couch co-op side-scrolling beat-em-up that's as faithful an adaptation as I've ever seen done in the video games industry. I've probably beaten it 10 times. It is cute and fun and has the greatest soundtrack of all time. It represents a lost era of game design when you could unlock new characters just by playing the game instead of paying for DLC. Play it with your friends. Then bring those same friends to play the card game. It has full-color art from the comics, and each character's personality really shines through in the game mechanics. There's also another game based around little figures, but I don't have that one. Hello, I'm Hawkwood, and I forgot to say that earlier. Of course, I wouldn't be doing my volunteer YouTube job if I didn't ask you what your favorite version of Scott Pilgrim was. Let me and everyone else in the world know in the comments below. You will be judged, but luckily, every answer is the correct one.